Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa College. Welcome to Culture by Neurodesign. An episode of this podcast that I released a couple of weeks ago, that was episode 56, was about my experiences of flying from Amsterdam's Schiphol airport with my autistic son. Now, that was not something that I was looking forward to at all. Flying is stressful for everybody, but especially for someone who values the known, who relies on predictability, someone like my son. It's hugely confrontational. But that stressful experience was doable, not fun, but doable because of some remarkable support that was offered by Schiphol Airport and offered by Leeds Bradford Airport on our return journey, and also by KLM Airline. And it brought to life for me how thoughtful design choices can make something that is hard just about doable. It brought to life how small differences can make a huge difference for the people that are impacted by the systems those differences are operating in. Now, I shared a reflection about that podcast on LinkedIn, and I was genuinely blown away by the response. There have been lots and lots of comments with people very generously sharing their own experiences and insights. And one thing that struck me was the consistency of some of the themes that people were interested in, which came out of the comments. So I decided to take a couple more episodes of this podcast and talk more about a couple of those strong themes that emerged and why they're so important to me in the work that I do in designing neuro-inspired cultures. And those are the cultures which are largely ready for neurodivergent people and also offer nicer, more engaging working environments for everybody, neurodivergent or not. And as you can imagine, when everybody is happier in their work, they lead to demonstrably, measurably better outcomes. So the first of those themes that I extracted and talked about was in episode 57, and that theme was progress over perfection, the importance of thinking about progress instead of worrying about perfection. And that was about how culture change isn't, as I say, really about the perfection, but about getting into motion and staying in motion. And this week I want to explore a second theme that also came through very powerfully in the comments on that Schiphol post, which is about freedom within a framework. Now, I love this leadership model of freedom in a framework. It's fantastic because what it offers us is a way to combine structure with autonomy in order to create a culture of neuro-inclusion. And there was one comment in response to my post, a comment from Anna Goriti, who I thought captured what I want to say perfectly. And she was sharing a travel experience of her own. She said, "There was awareness, empathy, and no questions when I requested an easy accommodation. And that's what made it truly inclusive." Now, it's that balance between awareness and flexibility of action, which is exactly the point of freedom within a framework. The best systems, wherever they are, in airports or in your workplace, the best systems give people enough structure to feel safe, enough structure to provide clarity, but enough autonomy to feel free, to shape things in your own way, to bring your own style and your own experience into play, to work in your preferred style, in your preferred neurostyle. Now, I found that a really good way to illustrate why this is true is to look at the ADHD neurostyle. Now, ADHD brains will typically struggle to sustain planning. There's a lower level of executive function, so it's easy for ADHD people to get overwhelmed by a high volume of unstructured information. But ADHD brains typically thrive on creativity, on new ideas, on making novel connections between things. For an ADHD mind, having too much freedom creates overwhelm. It stops progress because of this overwhelm. But too much structure creates suffocation, and then there's no progress because the brain is so constrained that it can't do what it naturally wants to do, which is to make all of these connections between things. So a culture that provides clear goals describing what is required, with autonomy in how you can reach those goals, that culture is enabling for ADHD people. Now, ADHD is at the extreme of a cognitive spectrum that we all sit somewhere on. So this is most clearly for ADHD people because they are at the extreme of that spectrum, but to some extent, what I'm saying is true for everybody. And predictability and structure, that's the framework, and autonomy or the flexibility, they aren't conflicting. They're absolutely fantastic complementary allies in creating a neuro-inclusive culture. That means a culture that's inclusive of neurodivergence and neurotypicality, that's inclusive of all of our neurostyles. Now, if I think back to Schiphol Airport, the predictability, the framework is provided by the need to keep everyone safe, to keep travellers and staff at the airport safe. There needs to be systems in place also to get large numbers of people to the right gate and to where they're going. So that's the framework. But what Schiphol did that made such a huge difference to me and my son was to offer flexibility in how we could navigate within that framework. They weren't prescriptive about how we had to do that. They didn't say, you've requested assistance, so sit in the wheelchair and we'll escort you to the gate. It was not one size fits all. They were flexible in how they assisted people. So there was space for us to say, please help us through the queues. Please reduce the amount of time that we need to stand in a warm, busy, overwhelming area with lots of people. But after we've been through security, we don't need to be accompanied anymore. In my judgment, walking around in the airport and giving my son the freedom to visit a shop if he thinks it looks interesting, that's going to be the best way for him to manage his overwhelm. If we think about that in the context of a team, then it's the difference between providing clarity about what and why we're doing, that's the framework, and the flexibility in how we do that. So it's a difference between focusing on the outcome, rewarding the outcome, which is when we reward contribution, and focusing on the process. When we focus on the process of how something is done, that's when we reward conformity. That used to be fine years ago when we were leaders in an environment when things didn't change very quickly, but it's not fine now because change is one of the only things that we can be certain of. So we need to focus on what needs to be achieved, not how it's done. And I like an anecdote from Louis Gerstner, who's the CEO of IBM, which really illustrates this very well. So he told an anecdote in his book about how he came across a rule where salespeople always had to wear a suit when they would visit customers. And when he was CEO, this was making the salespeople look out of touch with their customers, actually look disrespectful of their customers because their customers didn't dress this way. So there was just a very strong visual disconnect between the salesperson in their suit and tie and the customer who was much more casually dressed. And Louis traced this back to a decision that was made years ago when customers did dress in suits. But what somebody had done was to create a rule which focused on how we show respect for the customer. So at that time, the how was we must reflect the way that a customer dresses and wear suits and ties. They didn't say that we should show respect to our customer by reflecting how they dress and deciding how to behave accordingly. They were very prescriptive about how to do this. And so what happened was that the rule just became irrelevant and actually in the end started to have the opposite effect than the reason that the rule was created in the first place. So I think that that is, it's an amusing anecdote, but it's also a very sobering anecdote, and it shows us very, very clearly why focusing on what we're trying to achieve and leaving it up to people to interpret that in their context and with their own expertise is a much stronger way than telling people how to work. When systems already include the combination of flexibility and clarity together, people experience much less need to declare or justify their differences. And that's one of the foundations of designing a neuro-inclusive culture where all neurostyles can flourish without needing to disclose a diagnosis or disclose a suspected diagnosis unless people want to, which is sometimes the case. So in practice, design, not disclosure, means designing your environment and designing your team processes to anticipate cognitive variation, to anticipate cognitive diversity, instead of waiting until somebody tells you that it's present and then reacting to it. Design, not disclosure, is about offering options in how people can participate, in how people can communicate, and how they can deliver outcomes. It's about making this freedom in how people can contribute feel normal rather than exceptional. So, for example, if your team normalizes asynchronous updates after brainstorms, if your team normalizes sharing data before meetings so people can reflect about it quietly if they want to, then an introverted or an autistic team member doesn't need to announce that they're introverted or autistic in order to be able to contribute in that way. So I'm really happy with the focus on design, not disclosure, that emerged from the responses to my post about flying through Schiphol. Design, not disclosure, protects energy. It protects energy of leaders who spend much less time firefighting or managing accommodations because the system that they designed does the heavy lifting for them, or most of the heavy lifting. And individuals spend less energy fitting into a system that doesn't suit them, and they're better able to relax and recharge in the evening, and they're better able to contribute their own style of brilliance to the team outcomes. So inclusion is designed in as the norm, as a sustainable infrastructure, instead of the very fragile approach of it all being down to individual effort. So that is design, not disclosure. It's inclusion that doesn't depend on being asked for, but that happens through default by intentional design. So to conclude this podcast, predictability and freedom aren't opposites. Together, they are the foundation of safe environments, engaging environments for people with any neurostyle, neurodivergent or neurotypical. And that also automatically means that they are the most successful, impactful environments that we can provide for our people, for our talent. Now, this podcast episode is the end of me now looking back at that travelling through Schiphol post and drawing out core themes that resonated with you. But I've decided to reflect that great response I received in a free presentation to mark International Day of People with Disabilities on the 3rd of December. I'm still working on finalising all of the details, so the sign-up is not quite ready yet. But if you would like to be the first to know more about the content and the first to know when you can register and where, then please sign up for my newsletter, The Neuro-Inspired Question. You can sign up for that at www.lisacollegeconsulting.com/let's-connect, and I will also put that link in the notes that go with this episode. Thanks so much for listening.